Thorns of the Waking Court, a video novel by SDC Multimedia. Watch it like a movie, read it like a novel, or listen to it like a podcast. Chapter 9. The Hollow Ball. The court had declared a celebration, a night of masks and illusion. But for Calla, the air in Thorncourt still tasted of ash and untold secrets. The revelations from Elias about her mother had scorched the earth beneath her feet, leaving her raw, exposed, yet paradoxically, stronger. Her mother, not just a whisper of memory, but a living agony, eternally bound to the very tree Calla had sat beneath, consumed by the grove's twisted curse. The weight of that truth pressed down on her, heavier than any physical chain, but with the pain had come a cold, unyielding resolve. The anger was a new kind of fire, burning away the last vestiges of her fear, replacing it with a fierce, protective instinct. She was no longer a sacrifice. She was a daughter, inheriting not just magic, but a vendetta. The night of the Hollow Ball was an extension of Thorncourt's eternal twilight, gilded and deceptive. The great hall, still scarred from the Root Warden's judgment, pulsed with a new kind of light, not the raw green of the Grove's wild magic, but shimmering silver and deep, bruised violet, cast from floating lanterns shaped like crystalline flowers. These luminous blooms, hung suspended from shimmering threads, spun from moonlight, each one pulsating with an inner luminescence that seemed to deepen the shadows around them. Music, usually a mournful dirge of strings and a single, haunting flute, swelled tonight into a vibrant symphony, rich with the deep pulse of drums that echoed the very heartbeat of the grove, a rhythm Calla now felt in her own blood. The sounds were intoxicating, a velvet veil over the underlying tension. Calla stood at the threshold of the hall, Elias a silent, watchful shadow behind her. He had handed her a gown of nightshade silk, simple yet elegant, its dark folds contrasting with the pale, luminous sigil that still pulsed faintly on her wrist beneath the fabric. The dress was unadorned, allowing the Grove's mark to be the only ornament she bore. She wore no mask. Elias had suggested it would be a statement, a defiance. "Let them see your face," he'd said, his voice quiet but firm. "Let them remember it." Calla had agreed. Her face was her truth, and tonight she had no desire to hide. She felt the heavy weight of Elias's presence at her back, a grounding force against the swirling uncertainty of the court. He was more than a guardian. He was a silent anchor in a world intent on tearing her apart. As she stepped into the echoing space, a hush rippled through the masked throng. It wasn't the sudden silence of a court bowing to its king, but a slow, almost imperceptible shift in the air, a collective intake of breath. Hundreds of eyes, glinting through elaborate disguises of bone and feather, silver and polished wood, turned to her. Foxes of hammered silver, owls cast in jet, leering hounds carved from bleached bone, elegant human faces frozen in haughty beauty, monstrous visages of scaled beasts and snarling beasts, a masquerade of monsters, each hiding a truth or a lie. The air was thick with the cloying scent of spiced wine and crushed lilies, overlaid with the sharp, metallic tang of ambition that seemed to cling to the very silk of the courtiers' robes. Calla felt the weight of their combined gaze, 1,000 invisible threads attempting to bind her, to categorize her, to consume her. It was as if every eye was a tiny, hungry mouth, seeking to devour her secrets. She straightened her spine, forcing her shoulders back, letting her gaze sweep over them, refusing to be cowed. She was unmasked, and in her vulnerability, she found a strange, defiant power. Riven materialized at her side as if conjured by the very air, his usual casual elegance sharpened by the glittering theatricality of the ball. He wore a mask of iridescent beetle shell, reflecting fragmented rainbows of light, but his eyes, sharp and predatory, were visible through narrow slits, holding a familiar glint of mischief and calculation. His cloak, a riot of midnight blue and silver, flowed around him like captured smoke, emphasizing his lithe, almost serpentine movements. He was a creature perfectly adapted to this world of illusion and veiled threats. "Our unmasked queen," he drawled, his voice a silken thread woven through the rising tide of music. His tone was light, but there was an undertone, a proprietary note that grated on her nerves. A bold choice, though some might call it reckless, a maiden unmasked in a court of monsters. "Let them," Calla replied, her gaze sweeping over the swirling court, searching for familiar faces, for the dark silhouette of the Chancellor, for the pale, distant figure of Aerith. She could feel the pulse of the grove in the floor beneath her feet, the living magic vibrating in sync with the drumbeat, a silent reminder of the power she now harbored. Danger is half the thrill, isn't it? Riven's hand, gloved in soft leather, found her elbow, guiding her deeper into the throng. He pulled her into the current of dancers, a waltz of shadows and light that moved with a deceptive grace. The music was a living thing, flowing through the roots beneath the obsidian floor, vibrating up into her bones. She moved with him, the steps surprisingly natural, her body remembering rhythms she'd never learned, or perhaps rhythms that had been coded into her very being by the grove. She felt the subtle shift in Riven's posture, the way he subtly steered them through the crowd, always keeping her at the center of attention, yet always under his perceived protection. It was a performance designed for the court to witness. He leaned in, his voice a low hum against her ear, intimate and conspiratorial. Tonight, alliances are forged, favors bought, betrayals cemented. Every smile hides a blade, every laugh a secret treaty. The air is thick with ambition, Calla, a palpable hunger. His masked gaze flickered towards a figure draped in heavy dark robes, standing motionless on a high balcony, a presence that seemed to absorb all light, drawing the very air into its silent void. The Chancellor, her mother's jailer. The sight of him, so still, so utterly devoid of warmth, sent a cold dread through Calla, the familiar fear curdling in her gut. Her blood ran cold, a reminder of the raw, brutal truth Elias had revealed. "And what do you seek, Riven?" Calla asked, her voice tight, a hint of defiance in her tone. She struggled to keep her composure, to ignore the cold presence of the Chancellor. "To play the game," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on the exposed skin of her throat, "and to claim the highest stakes." He spun her in a tight circle, her nightshade silk skirt fanning out like a dark bloom, a fleeting shadow against the shimmering lights. When she came back to him, his face was impossibly close, his eyes gleaming through the slits of his beetle shell mask, reflecting her own anxious gaze. His fingers tightened subtly on her waist, drawing her closer than the dance required. And then, unexpectedly, his lips brushed hers, a fleeting, shocking pressure, cold and sharp, like the kiss of a winter thorn, yet with an unsettling warmth that lingered. It was a calculated gesture, she knew, designed to shock, to provoke, to make a public claim on her, a possessive mark, a challenge thrown to the entire court, a statement of ownership. The subtle murmur that rippled through the nearest masks was proof of his success. Calla pulled back, her breath catching, a gasp trapped in her throat. Her eyes, wide with surprise and indignation, met the mirrored surface of his mask, seeing her own fractured reflection staring back. He simply smiled, a thin, triumphant curve of his lips visible beneath the mask's edge, as if savoring the shock he'd inflicted. Before she could react, before she could find her voice, a hand, firm and unyielding, closed around her arm, not roughly, but with an undeniable authority. "The king requires your presence, Prince Riven." Elias. His voice was calm, a low, steady riverstone against the frantic music, but the grip on Riven's shoulder was iron, a silent warning. His steel feather mask gave nothing away, but his presence was a clear, cold barrier, an impenetrable shield between Calla and the prince. "So soon, Elias?" Riven's voice was laced with annoyance, a petulant whine beneath the smooth charm. He glanced at Calla, a flicker of frustrated ambition in his eyes. "The night is young, and the unmasked queen has only just begun to dance." "The king's word is absolute," Elias stated, his gaze meeting Riven's, a silent challenge passing between them, a history of unresolved conflict simmering beneath the surface. Riven's eyes, behind the mask, glinted with frustrated anger. For a moment, Calla felt the tension snap, almost crackling in the air, a silent battle of wills playing out in the midst of the swirling ball. The air around them seemed to thicken, charged with the unspoken animosity between the two men. Riven finally relented, a sigh escaping his lips, a performative gesture of surrender. "As you wish." He bowed to Calla, a theatrical flourish that was more mockery than courtesy. "Until our next dance, unmasked queen." He melted back into the crowd, his beetle shell mask disappearing among the swirling silks and shadows, leaving behind only the faint scent of crushed violets and a lingering chill. Elias pulled Calla gently away from the dance floor, his hand still firm on her arm, guiding her towards a quieter alcove, away from the glittering, dangerous eyes of the court. He kept his back to the main hall, his broad shoulders a physical shield against the hundreds of unseen gazes. "He plays a dangerous game," Elias said, his voice low, his face shadowed by the alcove's dim light. He looked less like a knight and more like a weary sentinel, burdened by too much knowledge. "I know," Calla replied, touching her lips, the ghost of Riven's cold kiss still lingering like a brand. It had felt less like desire and more like a warning, a claim. As Elias spoke, Calla caught a glimpse of a familiar figure in the outer circle of the hall, near a cascading waterfall of luminous moss. Alira. She was unmasked, her quiet dignity evident even from a distance, her root scars glowing softly under the pale lights. She watched Calla with an intensity that suggested understanding, a shared burden, a silent message passing between them, an unspoken alliance forged in defiance. Alira's presence was a quiet comfort, a small beacon of solidarity in the deceptive grandeur of the court. Calla's gaze drifted back to the high balcony, where the dark-robed figure of the Chancellor still stood, unmoving, an unblinking eye over his domain. He wasn't participating in the dance, the laughter, the subtle power plays. He merely existed, a chilling void at the heart of the celebration, absorbing all light and joy. His presence felt like a tightening noose around her mother's tree, reminding Calla of the roots of her mother's suffering and the true enemy that lurked in plain sight, calculating, patient. He was the darkness that fed on the Grove's pain, the architect of this beautiful dying realm. The music swelled again, a sudden, frantic crescendo of strings and drums, building to a dizzying pace. The dance floor filled with a blur of masks and cloaks, a maelstrom of movement. The air grew heavy, almost suffocating, with the scent of the grove's deepest veins, a thrumming tension building beneath the surface of the revelry. Calla felt a shift within her, the sigil on her wrist growing warmer, throbbing, resonating with the pulsing rhythm of the hall. The dance, the kiss, the veiled threats, the watchful eyes. It was all a prelude. She knew, with chilling certainty, that the night was far from over. Something was about to break. The grove, impatient and raw, was awakening, and Calla was its unwilling, yet destined conduit. The true danger had yet to reveal itself. End of chapter 9.